All right, now joining us, as we roughly every time this week, on a Tuesday after 12, is former ACT MP, City Councillor, Regional Councillor, lawyer, businesswoman, and overall political commentator, Hilary Calvert, to talk about the issues of the week. And she joins us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Hilary.
Hello, Michael.
Isn't that extraordinary? Melbourne just say, I'm pulling the plug.
Yes, and isn't it a breath of fresh air?
Yes, I guess you could say. You mean somebody's finally said, nah, it's not worth it?
Well, somebody's finally said, and I don't have any confidence in even it costing as little as much as that, as it were.
Oh, you mean he didn't even, you mean he's not believing the experts when they say it's only going to cost $6 billion. He says it'll be $7 and over. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's extraordinarily good. I'm very positive about that sort of move.
Okay. But mind you, where are they going to hold it? Are they going to hold it?
Well,
is the Commonwealth Games dead? There's a question for 1 o'clock for Martin. Is the Commonwealth Games dead? If the Australians can't hold it, and they're a rich country, who can?
Well, but he isn't saying we can't afford to. He's saying the game's not worth the candle, isn't he?
No, he's pulled out.
Yes, but what I'm saying is he's not saying Australia couldn't afford it. Australia's not that poor. He's saying that's not a good use of their money.
That's the Premier of Victoria, yeah. So it's not the Australian Prime Minister, it's the Premier of Victoria. They were the ones who bid for the Games, and now they've said, no, they had it.
Yeah.
And it's 2020, yeah, but it's 2024. What, it's July? Oh, no, it's July 2023, isn't it? So what have they got? They've got 3 years, less than 3 years to be able to get an alternative. As long as it's not New Zealand, Hilary.
Yes, because it turns out that if they haven't got enough money, lucky country, then we haven't.
I was pretty sure that the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson, was talking about bidding for the Commonwealth Games. Have I got that wrong?
No, I think he probably was. There appears to be no end to the things that this government will do with other people's money, namely your money and my money.
No, I think you're probably right about that. Yes, that's right. I'm right. Grant Robertson has said that he wants New Zealand to host the 2034 Commonwealth Games.
Yes. Well, what he wants in 2034 has nothing to do with anything, is it?
They're pretty good at spending money in the future, though, aren't they?
Yes.
Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about before you get on to what you want to talk about is, while I was away, Otago University, and I mean, this shouldn't affect the rest of New Zealand, but it sort of does, has decided that they're going to change their logo and junk, 150 or 60, 150 years of heritage and history.
Yes, although they're saying it's the same. It's sort of a much softer version in that they say they're going to use it for when they're... I mean, most people didn't have any particular objection to what Maori wanted to call the university in Maori. You know, speaking Maori, call it what you think is the right Maori words for it. You know, I don't think anyone had, and they focused on that, but they're now pulling back really from using that as the main masthead sort of stuff.
We'll see. They've got rid of the Otago University logo and replaced it with a Maori logo, which has been blessed, I understand, by local iwi.
Well, yeah, considering that I'm not allowed to insist on blessings from a god I may believe in. No. It's interesting that we get things blessed by other places so long as we do it in a language that we don't understand as just another religious thing.
Well, you just be glad that you are not being taught science in the future, because it will not be the science that, fits the definition of the word, really, will it?
Yes. I feel a column coming along about that.
Rightly so. If you turn into the show tomorrow, I will give you the background to how actually, the science curriculum or draft science curriculum got formed by a coterie of 5, 6, mostly radical feminists, ironically, who were appointed by Chris Hipkins,
The government.
Minister of Education.
I think the government's been sort of, in some respects, asleep at the wheel. There's a suggestion worldwide that one of the issues that is facing the world is that the technocrats and the people who work for us in government departments and things are now running the world, that the politicians aren't running it anymore, if they ever were. And that's part of that thing. And I think what happened under Jacinta's government, and is just continuing, is that the government was taking no notice of things that wasn't interested in, and it left it to other people. So it left it to the Maori caucus and the officials, and they were focusing on, COVID or whatever, or COVID or perhaps COVID, perhaps. And so a whole lot of things were happening that they had no idea about, no particular interest in.
Yes,
one of them.
I think you're spot on. I think you've got that. I was going, it's a bit like has been happening in the public sector in New Zealand for the last 40 years, in actual fact, when it comes to Maori stuff. We'll just let you guys go over there and do it. And both parties have been guilty of that, National and Labour. You just go over there and do your stuff. And then it's a bit like, did you ever watch Monty Python's Meaning of Life? The movie?
Yes.
And halfway through or that movie, it gets invaded by its trailer or some other movie. Do you remember that?
Oh, I don't remember it, but I know the general background of it.
So the main movie gets interrupted or invaded by another movie. And and it's meant to be funny, of course, but in actual fact, it's turned out to be deeply ironic and probably substantively correct. That's exactly what's happened here. So the Maori agenda has sort of invaded the mainstream. It was meant to be over there.
Well, blessed be the cheesemakers.
Yes, that's right.
As they said in that movie. In general, at the moment, we have entered the silly season, well and truly. Whether or not it's exactly 3 months till the election or whatever. And it's particularly important when you see what they're starting to promise and what they say they'll do in a couple of areas. One of them is that, to me, is that since what the government is doing is telling us a complete lot of crap, and whātua is one of the worst of them, but they have no shame, as far as I can see. They can tell us misinformation or what I think is verging on disinformation. I mean, Trump's followers can't do anything like as well as these guys can in the way of telling us things that just are nonsense. And then when they caught out on it, like Melissa Vining has caught them out recently, saying, you said 90% of people are getting things done in the South on time. No, they're not.
Sorry, just to explain to our listeners, Melissa Vining is a cancer researcher. Her husband, I think, died of cancer, and she's now become a bit of a cancer activist. And you're right, I think she used the Official Information Act, didn't she, to find out that Te Whātua Ora had lied about how much access cancer patients were getting to testing and diagnosis.
Yeah, because she's a lightning rod for disinclined cancer people because of her husband dying of cancer, and she has become an activist. She was getting all these things saying, this is nonsense. We've got a letter from the health board or whatever they are saying it's going to be 3 months till you get your treatment. So what do you mean 90% of us are being treated within a whatever? We can tell that we're not because we've got this letter saying we're not going to be. And she got sent a whole lot of them. So she went looking, I think, is what happened. And 3 times Radio New Zealand was told that, yes, that was the case. And when Melissa said this is just bullshit, they said, well, yeah, that figure we gave you applied to only radiation, and it was only after the first appointment. And they didn't say, we're really sorry, we not only misled you, but we lied to you. They just said, oh no, that applied to something else. No shame. And what's more important in some respects is two things. One is that we now don't, if we ever did, don't believe a thing they say, which is the position that the Trump supporters are in. They just don't believe anything the government says in America because they just don't anymore. Well, we wouldn't believe things the government says, I don't think, for any useful purpose. And the government is going to be making decisions on what to do next based on the information they've got. And they're now thinking of replacing the census because they couldn't get a high enough turnout with information they've got internally in government departments. So you put all that together and we're getting decisions being made by the government, even if it's a fabulous government, based on complete bullshit. What do you do with that?
So what you're suggesting is that if you are routinely lied to or misled, or there is a lack of shame coming from the public sector and generally in terms of the information they provide us, and no consequences when they are found out, that this inevitably must drive a solid number of New Zealanders into a position where I won't believe anything the government or the public sector tell me.
Well, that would be the smart money, wouldn't it? That would be where you'd go.
Well, that's where the anti-vax, anti-mandate people have ended up, in exactly that position.
Yes. And it's not, when we are making decisions about what to do next, and with taxpayers' money, how do we make them if the information isn't good? How do we make it good? And nobody seems to care that it's not good. The government certainly has no interest that we can ascertain at all in having good information too. It's all about the press releases and it's all about crap. So, of course, because it's the silly season, the opposition is going and finding out the truth about some of these things and saying, if it was us, we'd do things differently, because they now know what different might look like.
I mean, it's very interesting how we started this conversation, though, and you've identified a problem that I've talked about a long time, and you and I have talked about before, and that is that there always used to be a neutral public sector, or civil service we used to call them, ironically, neither civil nor service,
yes.
But who would always be there, and simply their political masters would roll in, either National or Labour usually, and they would tell them what to do. And they would get good evidence-based research to say, yes, that'll work, Minister, or this might work more effectively if you do it this way. Or, yes, fine, yes, we'll do that. But now what you're suggesting is something completely different. That the public sector, or the civil service in Wellington in particular, and the lead echelons of, are actually running the country and able to control their ministers or their political masters coming in by both controlling the information that goes to them, but also by putting their particular spin, philosophical, political, or whatever, upon that information too, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And that means that if they just believe in something enough, so if they should be neutral, and they're not. So if they just believe in something, they'll give stuff out, like the things that are happening at the moment with the Chloe Swarbrick having a go with the Greens about property with rental stuff, and some of the other Greens are saying, why don't we take people's private land and give it to Maori and things. The advice they're getting in the background of some of that is quite clearly either substandard or non-existent or something. And I thought that Treasury was an exception to this. Treasury does seem to have given the government quite a bit of advice, most of which it hasn't taken of recent times. But recently we heard that the government coffers were $2 billion lower than they expected. And that's essentially from company tax. And that's no big surprise to some of us, because if you had borrowings and your borrowings from the bank have doubled in cost, reasonable chance your income that you received that you were paying tax on as a company
will diminish.
Has diminished, not only halved, it might be non-existent now. So if you have a building that you were receiving income on and your interest has doubled, you might now have, instead of giving the government $100,000 because you had $3,000 profit, you might have none. So you've just got none. So that doesn't go down in proportion to the borrowings, because that might be too much of the... Anyway,
but you've also got potentially a loss that you can write off against future profits as well.
Exactly. So it's a wee time bomb for next year. But I'm surprised that the Treasury didn't think that was going to happen, that it was a surprise to them, because usually they're better than that.
Yes. But again, so no heads will roll. Yeah. I mean, you're right. If there's a $2 billion hole in your predictions between what you've got and what you haven't now got, and that's going to truncate what you can spend, presumably, that money on, or then if you're this government, you simply go and borrow it. You're right. But there again, no consequences. No one's going to lose their job over this.
And we've got $500 million in expiring rat tests.
That is a scandal of the greatest magnitude.
It's just, what could we do with $500 million? And how come nobody said, if you're spending money, is that the best way of spending it? Or did it just come out of such a big COVID slush fund that nobody even looked at it? And when people were begging to be able to import their own, and the government said, no, we will control this, you will not be allowed to, which is really draconian money, communist crap stuff, state control stuff. And then you find out that they've spent $500 million. Unbelievable.
It is.
Again,
no heads roll, no consequences, no nothing.
Yeah.
Just, by the way, we've got... and the irony is that not only did you spend the $500 million acquiring the PEP stuff, this is to do with COVID, and testing that's all going to expire in about 6 to 12 months' time, but you're actually got them all stored in a warehouse that's costing you $100,000 a year more in just storage costs. And
the good news is that presumably when they expire, a lot of them in August, at least we won't have to pay to store them.
Well, actually, Aisha Verrall, I don't know, because the Minister of Health, Aisha Verrall, was quoted on this saying, you're absolutely right to raise this issue. She actually said, Hilary, but we're trying to repurpose them. Did you hear that?
No.
Yeah, so we don't actually want it all to end up in a landfill somewhere, which would be ironic because they'd also have to pay landfill costs to dump it there, but we're actually trying to repurpose it. And I'm going, okay, so you're going to invest more money in this?
Well, I'm just imagining what repurposing. Do they mean that they're going to send them to a poor country that we owe something to and give it to them because they're all expired so it doesn't matter? That we don't want them anymore.
Could be. We might end up in Fiji at Raki on the next little tour around London and walk into a 7-Eleven or the equivalent of a Foursquare over there and go over there and get our used by rat test.
Yes, I can't imagine what you do with them, but
it is. Listen, we're laughing, but it's not a funny matter. It's $500 million
that around them could be repurposed to make roading. You could get the plastics and you could turn them into little beads and make roading out of them.
Listen, all I know is that when you hear I hear repurpose, I hear more money being thrown down the same hole that you've just thrown the $500 million down.
Yes.
But again, no one held accountable. So for that, let's put this out. Minister of Health, not held accountable. Secretary of Health, not held accountable. None of the people who ordered it held accountable. We don't even know who they are.
They have no shame. They don't think. Aisha Verrall didn't think it was a bad thing.
Yes, that's right.
So she's not holding somebody to account because there wasn't a bad thing that she'd hold them to account for.
I was just thinking last night as I was watching the poll last night and thinking, this government, and you've actually raised a really interesting point this morning, and your point is they're not so much philosophically driven, this government, as incompetent. That's pretty much your line, isn't it? So therefore, in terms of policy making, they've left the senior bureaucrats and all those policy wonks in Wellington to look after that. And at the same time, when it comes to actually managing the economy, well, they're not very good at that either. Yeah?
Yeah, and because their eyes aren't on the game at all. They don't give a tinker.
What game are they on then? If you're not on the game, if their eyes aren't on the game. Yeah? They're
on the we want to be re-elected platform. That's the total focus. We want to be re-elected. And they're probably a bit concerned about that now. And then you've got that particularly stupid new crime policy with the ram raiders.
Oh, yes.
You know, they've thought we need to get tough on crime too, because although we don't believe in it or approve of it or want anybody more in prison or any of those things, we know that the other people are creaming us in the polls as a result of them having a policy like this. So we need to get in amongst it. So what they do is they say, this 11, 12-year-old kid, probably a boy, who's just ram raided probably a vape store or somewhere, we're now going to make a rule that says he's not allowed to put it on social media or watch out. Now, we've found that we can't deal with him and put him anywhere that stops him doing it again or anything. So what are we going to do is we're going to say that really bad thing he's done, stealing something with menaces and things, and frightening people and all manner of crap, we're now going to add another crime he's done. We're going to say putting it on social media is also a crime. And what are we going to do with him because he's done that crime? The same nothing you did with the last week's crime. Really? Really? You're going to make a rule about social media for the same people that are too young to be dealt with already? Now, if you said, and they're saying, well, they're put up to it by their older brothers and sisters or whatever. Their older brothers and sisters are only 14. They can't be dealt with either. And still putting it on social media, you know, adding that to the list of non-follow-up criminal offences is just beyond stupid, I think.
You're right. Has anything else caught your eye this past week or so?
On the whole, I think where other things that are happening are that the government is, like it is now in Wellington, making ever more rules for other people that they don't want to do themselves. So in Wellington now, I think it's the ministry, and again, this is the bureaucrats tail wagging the dog stuff. They want to not have the rules about condensed housing and things apply to them. They want to change the rules so when you have government social housing, you can pull down historic buildings and you can put them up close together, despite the fact the fire service says that's part of a problem of itself. So increasingly the government is quite clearly and obviously saying if we want to do something, we can do it. It's not a good reason for you to, but for us, we ought to be able to do all these things that we've been spending years trying to stop you doing.
Well, that would seem to be de rigueur at the moment. Just quickly, though, last night you would have seen ACT going up, I think, another point that went from 11 to 12. They've named their list. David Farrar, we had on the show earlier this morning, said that that was a particularly brutal list in the sense that, you know, but that he marvelled at the internal discipline that ACT was showing. I guess, despite the brutality of the list and certain MPs going or being shuffled down it, if they do poll at roughly the same rate, I think all of the caucus still get back. But
yes,
and I compared and contrasted Seymour's leadership with, and we were talking about this. David Farrar noted that this was an election very much like 2005 in terms of quite close leading into the final result. But then I looked at the 2005 election. I note that Rodney Hyde ended up with just 2 seats, him and someone else.
Him and Heather Roy, that was an interesting combination.
Oh, right. Yeah, they were polar opposites of each other in terms of personality, I would have thought. Well, they were, aren't they, too, as well. But so ACT went from having 9 seats to 2 as a result of that election. Is that personality that takes you from 9 to 2, that takes for Seymour from sort of 2% to 12?
No, that discipline is good. The personality is good. The timing is excellent. I think people are they're mistrusting the major parties, right? They mistrust the mainstream media, and so they're looking for alternatives. And for ACT to be a good alternative, they just need to sound sensible and be disciplined. And they are, both of those things, I think. When Seymour doesn't say things about everything, but when he does, it sounds sensible enough to most people, I think. That's why he's... they're not sure that when we get a change of government, which I think is very likely, it's going to be heaps better than the last lot. You could say the point of changing a government, even if they're not heaps better than the last lot, would be that that's how democracy works. If you don't keep changing them, they get an idea that you like them or something, which would be the dead wrong idea on the whole. So you change them anyway. And the way to just change them anyway and keep democracy working well is to choose the likes of ACT. So you're telling them, it's not that we love you guys, just giving you an idea here. It's that we don't like the current lot.
Right.
But don't get too comfortable.
And ironically, that's been part of New Zealand politics for 30, 40, 50 years. Go back to social credit. They got 30%, I think, in one election. So it gives you some indication that... 21%, sorry. So it gives you some indication that there's always been a strong third-party vote in this country because we distrust both National and Labour.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Hilary. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Talk to you next Tuesday. You have a good week.
Lovely. See ya. Bye.